Your next moderator is the CEO and founder of the Half the Sky Leadership Institute, which launched in January 2013. It's dedicated to expanding opportunities for women and as leaders and to advance and thrive out in the marketplace. She's spent 35 years in doing these types of things in human resources and talent development. And talent development is something, it's a phrase like a lot of amorphous things out in the business world. What she does is she helps executives and young people in the industry really figure out what they should be doing, what they do well, and how to craft a career around doing those things every day. This is a very difficult skill to employ on a daily basis, and she is one of the best out there. Before founding Half the Sky, she was the Vice President of Talent Management and Leadership Diversity at Comcast, which is a company I now work for. We are very, very fortunate to have here leading us in a great conversation. I'd like to welcome to the stage CEO and founder of Half the Sky Leadership Institute, Grace Kililea.
Good morning, everyone. I am delighted to welcome a group of women to a panel this morning. First of all, who got up at 3:30 this morning? Wow. So, just what I was thinking about was when I started my career and all of the 2 a.m. starts and things I had to do to get my career going. So I applaud you for doing that and for your dedication. So I'm going to invite a group of amazing and talented women out onto the stage to start a conversation. So I'm not going to do bios. I'm not going to do lots of background because I'm going to have them introduce themselves. So Don Callahan is joining us. Leslie Ellis, Vibha Rustagi, and Diane Trinesky from HBO. Come on out, ladies. You all have a mic. Leslie Ellis, how are you? Welcome, everyone. So, ladies, if you'd grab a seat and a microphone, and we will start our conversation. And Jennifer Yohe from Comcast was unable to join us this morning. She's under the weather, but I know she would have been delighted to join you. So, during the introduction, I was introduced as someone who's in the leadership space, and I did run talent management and acquisition for Comcast. I was a senior vice president there. That was 3,000 directors and above in our succession planning process, and over 27,000 hires a year. So I ran recruiting. We took 1 million resumes a year in when I was there and left in 2012. And now I spend the majority of my time working for companies like Comcast and Coca-Cola, SAP and Boeing, doing leadership development. We have about close to 500 people who've gone through our leadership programs. So this is a space I'm really passionate about. And for the last 20 years, I've really been focused on helping women develop their careers. So I'm going to start with my friend to my right, Don Callahan. And I've asked them to tell you a little bit about who they are, what they do, and their background in terms of education and what they do today. So Don, I'll kick it off to you.
Thank you, Grace. So I promise that this is not going to be the longest story of your lives, because I was like, how am I going to tell the question was, how did you get from here to there? And I was like, well, how long do you have? So I will start sort of in my 20s, and I think that the best thing I can tell you is that my career has been a function of a total accident and just saying yes a lot. So what happened was I was working in production. I was a writer, producer, director, very creative person, and I was working for this company called Jones Intercable. We had our GM called us all together one day, and he said, so it turns out we did a customer satisfaction survey of all our divisions. We ranked 40th out of 40 of divisions. We were dead last. And he's like, does anybody have any ideas of how we can improve? And if you have any ideas, let me know. And so I marched back to my office and typed out a memo, because we typed out memos back then. And typed out a memo, and I said, here are 5 things I think that we can do from a production department, sent them in and whatever. And a week later, he called me in his office and he said, you're the only person in the entire company who gave me any ideas, including my leadership team. So I'd like you to be our new service quality improvement manager. And I said, no, I'm creative. I don't do that. I'm creative. And he said, how much money do you make? And I said, I make $25,000 a year. And he said, I will give you $30,000, and if you hate the job in 6 months, I'll give you your old job back. And I was like, done. So I did it for 6 months. I loved it. I absolutely fell in love with it. Long story short, we went from last in the company to first in the company in about a year. So, yeah, thank you. So About a year later, the marketing person left and they said, we'd now like you to be the marketing person. And I said, no. I'm a fix-it person. That's what I do. I'm a fix-it person, not a marketing person. And he said, all right, I will give you a raise and you can do this for 6 months. If you hate it, I'll give you your old job back. And I said, all right. So I became the marketing person. And what I found was that marketing was this perfect blend of my creative background with business acumen and how you really take business to the next level. And it was a great fit for me. So I went from there. I went to Time Warner for 10 years. I ended up running marketing for Time Warner on the West Coast. And then I joined a startup 9 years ago, little teeny tiny company at the time called Boingo Wireless that no one had ever heard of. And joined the company, ended up taking the company public about 4 years ago. We are now the world's leading Wi-Fi company, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer.
Great story, yeah? Vibha.
Hi, I'm Vibha Rustigi, and my journey started with my undergrad in engineering, so I have a bachelor's in electrical engineering. And I also have a master's in business administration, so an MBA. But I started off in engineering at Scientific Atlanta, which has now become Cisco over the last 7 or 8 years. And with an engineering degree, started off as an engineer, did that for a few years, and then I asked my engineering manager, I said, I really want to get into business management, kind of like what Don was saying. And he said, well, that's really not going to be good for you because you're an engineering grad, so you should kind of stick to that. You're good at it. So I thought about it for a few seconds, and I thought, well, to heck with that. So I went to the marketing guys, and I said, hey, can I get an opportunity? They said, sure, do this project. If you can do this, you have an opportunity. So went in, got the job, and then from there on, worked on the business management side. And a few years later, about 10 or 11 years into that journey, I decided to jump off on my own and started a company called ITAS, which is providing video services in this whole digital ecosystem. And that with a couple of other partners, so we co-founded that. And then about 15 years later, last year, we got acquired by Cognizant and are now part of Cognizant. So that's my journey.
Thank you. Good morning. Vibha is very humble. Last week she won the the biggest award for women, the Women in Tech Award from the SCTE and Women in Cable.
Thank you.
It just keeps on going, Vibha. You're never going to get free of it. Okay, my name's Leslie Ellis. I'm a technology translator. My first and last name can be spelled upside down on a calculator. Do you know what a calculator is? I think that's a very important hallmark for it. I studied business administration in college with a side emphasis in computer science. I sucked at it. This was back in the days of the cardboard cards with the hole punches. And my name in the lab my nickname was Infinite Loop. So that was, obviously I'm not a computer scientist, but I started out in cable. Nobody that I know says, I want to be in the cable industry. And I am one of those people. I just kind of fell into it. I started out writing hardware and software manuals for an equipment company, moved on to the magazine side, wrote for communications engineering and design for a few years, multi-channel news. Then decided I wanted to go on my own, which I've been on my own for the last 15 years doing this tech translation thing. And my rules of engagement are interesting work for people who aren't assholes. Sometimes you fall down on the interesting work part because you get to work with the same people for so many years, you become friends with them, they ask you to do stuff that's not all that interesting. But I've been in the industry for 29 years, I love what I do, and that's me. And Diane.
Hi, I'm Diane Trineski. My path was one of those circuitous ones, I think. I didn't actually go to college right after I graduated. I spent some time working for a few years, did some night courses. I was always motivated to a goal, so I was taking courses that, should I decide to go back to school, that I would be able to have some of that behind me, some core courses. I did go back. I went to Rutgers. I got my undergrad in communications and journalism. And again, always looking towards a goal. And my last year, I did an internship at PBS. And for that internship, I did a project looking at PBS member stations at the time. And I did something for the job and something to get my degree. And my thesis was, how can PBS stations make additional money by using existing facilities in other ways other than just broadcasting. So I turned that in. I got a good grade on that, and I got a job at PBS, WNET in New York. So that was my first job. And I went from there over to ABC and Production Services. And the one thing I've heard throughout this, and I think has been similar for me, I didn't necessarily always choose my next job. My next job sometimes chose me, or I was given an opportunity. And I think I was given an opportunity because I was open. And so I was in telecommunications. I went into, from telecommunications, I was on the production services side of the house. I left ABC and went to Discovery to start up a production unit there. Again, I had the background on the tech ops side, not on the producing side. But I think if you say yes, as some have said, and you're open to opportunities, people embrace that. And it's about being smart. It's about being open. It's about really doing your best and looking for new opportunities. Long story short, Discovery, back to ABC for a couple of years, and then I went over to HBO about 6 years ago. I started at HBO as the head of, I think it was called Studio and Broadcast Ops at the time. As the industry evolved, so did my job. Over those 6 years, I would pick up different parts of the technology organization. And as of, I think, first quarter this year, I'm now in charge of all technology for HBO.
Remarkable. And so, Diane, you picked up that thread of saying yes. And so the question I have, and I'll start with you, Leslie, is around confidence. You know, sometimes we're asked to do things and we don't feel like we have everything lined up. Can you talk a little bit to our students about saying yes even when you're not sure you're completely ready, and have you had to do that in your career?
Yeah, well, so it goes back to what Joe said this morning. Just to smile and do it. Just smile and do it, and even if you don't want to do it. My grandmother used to always say, it takes more muscles to frown than it does to smile. I don't know if that's true, but you know, just do it. Just do it.
Yeah, I think it's, I agree completely that I think it's important to take the step forward to do it, and nothing's ever going to be perfect. I know that, or easy, yes, and it's important. I think at least when I launched our company, you know, it comes back to that. I was doing this analysis about, you know, the pros and cons, and I met a friend of mine that evening, and she said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm evaluating," and she said, "Haven't you been evaluating for about 3 weeks now?" So I said, "Yeah, I have," and she said, "What the heck are you waiting for?" So, you know, that was a very big push, and I thought, well, yeah, what the heck am I waiting for? So you just can never have enough information, so you have to take the step forward, leap forward, and be confident in what you're doing, and surround yourself with people that can help you if you need that knowledge base. So just do it. I think Nike is going to be really happy about this.
Yeah. Well, and the truth is, you know, there's that expression, fake it till you make it, and there's also the fake it till you become it. And so sometimes you really do have to step into something and learn as you go. And particularly for women, what we find is we can over-ruminate, right? We talked about this morning. I ruminate and then I hesitate. I think so long about things, I don't actually take action. And action is critical. So Don, when someone said to you, you know, do this job, and you're like, you know what, I'm good. I'm $25,000, yay, I'm solid, thank you very much. Looking back at that time, you obviously said yes. $5,000 was the carrot that got dangled. You were sold your soul for $5,000. But as you look back and as you look at people today coming into your organization, what's something that a 21-year-old, a 25-year-old, what's a skill they need to focus on to help them get ahead in the world we're in today?
The yes is a big piece of it, for sure. The other thing that I'd say is one of the things that I think makes people sort of separate themselves between like who's good and who's great, right? Like that's the thing that, because it's so easy to see greatness. Like when you're a leader, you go, oh, he's got it, she's got it, she's got it. And one of the things that is really about anticipating. And what I mean by that is, if you've got a project to do, right, for your boss that you're going to be doing, try to not just do your best job on that project, but also try to anticipate what the questions are going to be. And so like, for example, if you're going to present it, what are the things that Dawn is always going to ask? Because I tend to be pretty predictable in the kinds of things that I'm asking for. And so when you not just do the project, but take the step to say, what is he or she going to ask me about this? What perspective? Have I looked at this from the customer's perspective? Have I looked at it internally and how we're going to communicate about it? And so great people don't just do the job, they go beyond and they think about it from many, many angles, and they've already answered the questions that you're going to come up with. And so at that point, you're running the show. I'm just helping guide you, but you really are helping, you're running it, and that's what greatness looks like.
I love that. I absolutely agree. What I say to my staff all the time is, don't wait for the question. If you're hearing a question in your head, somebody else has that question, and so you should go there first. I think the other side of that is also that I got caught up in what you were saying because I think philosophically that is someone who is passionate about what they're doing. They're thinking of all angles, and the one trait associated with that, though, is that you can't make people feel like you're challenging them, because sometimes you don't get the right responses back. And so oftentimes I will ask in the form of a question or in a neutral way, well, have you considered, or, well, what if this happened in a certain way? So that you're not, it doesn't feel to the person that you're talking to that you're challenging them, and you're inviting them to share knowledge with you. I know I went off into a different tangent, but it's part of the same string.
Framing the questions
Yes.
appropriately and being prepared. I think that's really important. Not what we discussed earlier was, you don't have to have everything in place or every question answered, but being prepared is very important, and knowing how to ask the questions.
And I'll add to that, and feeling secure enough to say you don't know.
So I think it's important that what we find, there's a lot of research that women don't always raise their hands and throw out their suggestions, because you talked about it, Vibha. They want to formulate the perfect response. And then someone else comes up with half of that idea and they get championed for it, or they get rewarded for it. So one of the things to think about as a young leader, as someone starting their career, that you do need to have background. You do have to be solid in the work. And competence is table stakes, right? Doing the work just gets you in the door. It is not enough. You can't just come in with your degree. And not unlike Diane, I also didn't have a straight line to a college degree. So while I was in college, my sophomore year in college, my father got very ill, and I dropped out and worked 3 jobs. My mom had a 3rd grade education, had never worked outside of the home, and English was not her first language. So there were a lot of reasons I should have not ended up as an SVP of a Fortune 30 company. A lot of reasons. But the one thing I always did was I worked hard. And people forget that, right? They're like, well, I'm smart and I'm creative, but I promise you, every woman here has been up at 2 a.m. doing some kind of project, finishing something for a boss. So you've got to be willing to do the work, be competent, but then what's that next thing? And as women, Dawn, you mentioned that for a long time you were the only woman in a room. Can you talk a little bit about being a woman leader or coming up in the career and being that only voice in the room? I'll start with you.
Yeah, I was even at Time Warner, right? It's cable traditionally was a very male-dominated kind of industry. It's changed a lot in the
Not that much.
Yeah, well, yes, that's true. And
Welcome
so
back.
thanks. When I joined Boingo, I was the only woman leader in our company, the only one. And I was the only one for 7 years. 7 years, being the only woman at the table, literally. There's still no women on our board. So it is, and it becomes one of the things that we were talking about sort of ahead of time was, well, how do you get people to, how do you get women to, do you mind if I transition to this next part? How do you get women elevated? And I would say that it's kind of a couple things. One is, it becomes my job to raise people up. It becomes my job to be demanding that there are more people sit around that table that are women, that are people of color, that are diverse, that look like the world that we live in, right? So it becomes incumbent on me to, whenever I have a job that I'm hiring for, is to make sure that opening is filled by somebody that looks like the world that we live in.
So I know each of us have had some experience. Vibha, I know that you started a firm in a very male-dominated industry. Can you talk a little bit about your experience?
Sure. Before I do that, I'll say that, when Leslie hosts all these very phenomenal technology events, she always asks, how many women? And they...
I always take a moment to acknowledge the 3 or 4 women in the room. Like, could you please raise your hand? We are always like the 5%.
Yes. And so...
If that.
If that. Yeah. Interestingly enough, that does play a key part in at least what I'm thinking. And then to your question, when I launched the company, as the CEO of ITAS, it's really important from a technology perspective to just kind of review. CNN Money did this survey where only 5% of women in the S&P 500 are executives, are CEOs. So there's a long ways to go. But as part of my experience, I think it's important, to your point, to be fearless when you are in meetings, to sit at the table. I know we all say that, but it's important to be in the front lines, do not hold back, and express what you're thinking, to frame the questions appropriately. So from my perspective, starting that was the first step. It's taking the risk and being fearless and not stepping back, always looking forward. And I think many of us have talked about saying yes, and I think that was really important. I also have to say that I had a lot of mentors and sponsors all along the way, including Leslie and many others. So I think it's really important to share that, and that has to be genuine from your heart. It's not because you're trying to use people to get to places. I think that's also very, very critical.
I guess the only thing I can add is that I was the only woman in the room for so long that I had to do a course correction. There was a prominent woman in tech in our community who pulled me aside and said, you're not spending enough time, like you're not doing your share in attracting more women to tech and asking more, like making sure that women in tech stay in tech. So I had to kind of course correct, and I've really upped my game in that department in the last 5 years. But you hang around with guys for 20 years, you start acting like a guy, I'm kidding.
That's a whole other panel. Diane?
I think that people are afraid of difference. And in something that has been so male-dominated, women are different. And so I think it is important to embrace the differences. Again, we all say very similar things, so whether it's a woman or somebody who thinks differently, but you just can't be timid about it. There will never be, as everyone has pointed out, the perfect time, the perfect set of circumstances. And quite frankly, if there is, that crest has already gone over the other side, probably. What you want to do is catch it up here, because then you have an opportunity to shape it.
Are you a surfer?
No, I'm not.
I know, she's
That was
great
surf
analogy.
talk.
So some of the things to think about, and sort of distilling some of this, is we have to show up, right? We've got to suit up. We have to speak up. As women, we tend to over-apologize. That's certainly something we see, particularly for younger women. We see, this may not be a good idea, but we disqualify our power. This is about being powerful, even when you're afraid. And I think that, today, I'm going to guess that all of us have had circumstances in the recent past where we've had to step into something and think, I've got this, even though we're not 1,000% locked down. But if you show up and you believe in yourself, right? There's that self-belief, I've got this. You suit up, you're right for the environment. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because there's this change with millennials coming in, how we show up, how we dress for work. We've gotten away from that corporate suit, which is what I grew up in. I'm 57, so when I started working, it was shoulder pads, and you dress like a guy. I mean, if you had a corporate job. But technology's also changed the way we lead. And as flexibility comes in, what are you seeing in the workforce? right, as women leaders around supporting millennials who are coming in, who want more flexibility, and are your organizations adapting to that, and are you adapting to that as leaders? And I'll start with anyone who wants to jump into that one.
Well, so I am the role model for you because I work by myself. I always have 2 dogs asleep at my feet. You know, I work for myself, so I call my own shots. I don't have to conform to any particular code, and that's super cool. But you know, you can't start there. You have to work your ass off for many years, and then you can do that.
Yeah, I would say that, you know, at Cognizant, which is what we're part of now, there's a lot of flexibility. And part of that is, you know, if you're working from wherever, as long as you get the job done and do it well, it doesn't really matter where you're sitting or what you're wearing. Obviously, if you're at a client meeting or at a meeting, you know, dress comfortably and feel whatever makes you feel confident, as long as they're not beach clothes, I think it works. So I think that works out really well. Whatever makes you feel comfortable and confident is what you should dress up as or in, but also working from anywhere, as long as you can get it done for the middle, especially in this day and age, no one needs to be sitting in an office specifically.
So this is an industry where you have both sides of the spectrum, right? You have the more startup, the more entrepreneurial tech companies, but you also have traditional cable, where people have big towers and big buildings, and they are more corporate. So, you know, as a young leader coming in, you really do have to pay attention to what's going on around you. You know, you have to read the room. It's important. And we get judged, particularly as women, we get judged very quickly by our executive presence, how we show up. So, you know, making sure that you're right for the environment and you're adapting. And what I like to say is, you don't have to lose your authenticity, but make sure you're appropriate for that event. And you can have a dimmer switch, right? So maybe in your personal life, you're at 100% wattage, but maybe in your organization, you need to be rolling in at about an 80 until people sort of get used to who you are and how you are. You know, I'm an extrovert with my own zip code. So that doesn't always work in every environment. And I have to gauge my audience and where I am. So let's talk about current day. As business leaders and owners and executives, what's the skill set? What makes you want to hire someone that's coming in? We've talked about when you're in and someone's saying yes. But what's that mojo you're looking for? And what's something that the students here today and the folks that are, you know, interested in the industry can be focused on skill set wise and style wise? Leslie, I'll start with you.
Okay, I'll tell you a story. So a couple years ago, I guess it was 5 years ago, I wanted to build an over-the-top video lab in my office, you know, to test all this stuff that was going to kill the cable industry. And I was at a cable event, and a friend of mine's daughter, who was your age, came up to me and like, hey, how's it going, Kirsten? Good. What are you going to do this summer? She's like, well, I'm either going to nanny or waitress, I guess. I don't know. What do you want to do? She's like, well, I want to do like some real work. And I said, what can you do? And she goes, well, I can do anything. I said, really? Could you take a bunch of analog videotapes and digitize them and put them on my website? Yes. I said, do you know how to do that? She goes, no. I said, could you do that without like asking me a million questions? She goes, yes. I said, you're hired.
Awesome, right?
And then she ended up building the lab after that. Because it was like, hey, could you take that back room and fill it with all this equipment? And we'll go buy it together, and you can set it all up and just play with it all day long and not ask me a lot of questions. She goes, yeah.
It's that yes word again. Yeah. We love that word.
At Boingo, we hire for 3 qualities. We look at people, 3 different qualities, and it is competence, which you talked about earlier, is actually our 3rd thing in line. Our first is attitude and communication. So those are the 3 qualities that we look for. It's actually what we rate ourselves on. So when we get our performance reviews each year, those are the 3 qualities we measure on, which seems weird, right? Like, well, but isn't competence the most important thing? And our belief is if you're a good communicator and you have a great attitude, and let's assume that you're smart, right? If those are the assumptions, you can do anything. There is not, unless, we're not talking about brain surgery here, but there's a lot of things that you can learn if you've got a great attitude, you're a good communicator, and you can learn the competence piece. So those are the 3 things that we hire for and look for a lot.
And what about business acumen? Because one of the things that I saw as a talent leader is that we would have people who were really good at something, marketing, maybe technology, but didn't really have the business side. Can you talk a little bit about, you've talked about going through an acquisition and merging with companies and reading a P&L, and people that say, oh, well, I don't really like the numbers. But I've certainly seen that be a challenge for people. Diane?
Yeah, so one of my jobs as I went through my journey was in business management and finance. which was not something I was interested in at all. But again, it was an opportunity, it was a promotion. And what surprised me at the end of it is, wow, it's really important to be able to make your case with the numbers. Because that's a language that, any corporate...
Follow the money.
Yes, yes. And so while that was the one that, perhaps going in, I thought, don't really know what I'll find here, it has served me well in everything I've done since. The ability to be able to, as I say, tell your story with the numbers, has enabled me to do things that perhaps I would not have been able to do or have sold in the company as an idea. So I would say that is incredibly important to anything you do.
I would agree with that. I would say I actually went back to school and ended up getting my MBA because I was not a business undergrad. So that was incredibly important to my career, to be able to speak the language of currency, of a P&L. It was really, really important. And the other thing I'd say is, with respect to your career, I don't know if you guys would agree with this or not, but with respect to your career, I'd say the more that you align yourself with areas that have direct contribution to revenue, the higher and faster you can grow within the organization. I personally found that to be true. I'd be sort of interested in what you guys think about that.
I totally agree with that. I think it's important because you're ultimately making a difference to the bottom line. And the financial aspect, I mean, we all like to do fun things, great things, but ultimately it's about how successful financially is your organization or your effort or whatever that you're doing, because ultimately then you can then either reinvest that money in the organizations. So I think that's very critical. If you're part of that track, it's important to be part of the organization where you're making a financial contribution, and that leads to a lot of visibility.
Well, and I would also say don't pigeonhole yourself. Like when I was a tech beat reporter for about 4 or 5 years, and a friend of mine, I was trying to get some information out of her. It was AT&T broadband before they were bought by Comcast. And I was like, well, tell me about why are you taking this path in your tech strategy, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, pull up. You need to pull up. Like all you think about is tech. There's all these other lines of business. There's marketing. There's finance. Like you're too one-sided. You have to widen your view. It was really good advice.
Well, and again, I think understanding a P&L, understanding how you're impacting revenue, and I had a 35-year career in human resources, and very often people come to me and they'll say, I want to be in HR, and I'll say, why? And they'll go, well, I like people. Okay. And what I usually say is follow the money. Follow the money. Where are the roles? Where are the opportunities? If you're going to invest time and energy in building a career, I also want you to think about creating wealth for yourself, creating opportunity for yourself, having access to things that you're interested in. It's not just, I like people. And many of us, I'm going to guess no one here, looking back when you were 21 or 22, would predict in any way, shape, or form that your road would take you here. I ended up getting a master's degree without an undergrad from AU. I had a very long corporate career, a successful one that I was delighted to do. But at 53, I decided to start my own business and took a huge leap of faith. But I had foundation over that time. So I want to talk a little bit about that foundation. For me, it was building a strong network. It was having people in my Rolodex that would support me and help me as I went on this journey. So I'd like to talk about how you have built a network, if you have. Sometimes women will say, nope, I've been fine without one, but like your perspective on that. And Leslie, you've had such a broad perspective in the industry. I'll start with you. You're probably one of the best Rolodexes in the industry, but...
I actually still have a Rolodex.
Yes, you do.
Yes,
Yes, you do.
I like collecting business cards.
Me too.
But so I guess for me, because I came in through the news door, and I came into this magazine that I still write for, Multi-Channel News, at a time when the tech editor had left. And my first few months on the job were kind of mopping up after him. He misquoted people. Sorry, I hope he's not watching this. But he left. People didn't want to talk to the magazine anymore because he had done so much damage to them personally and to their companies. So I started. My mother was a court reporter. I started taking verbatim notes. I made it a point to never misquote, and I would go to people and say, "I understand your differences with Multi-Channel News. I'm different. I promise I will never misquote you." And so I spent over the fullness of time, about 20 years building trust with people. And I think that's kind of what it is for me. People trust me because they know I'm not going to twist what they say or take things out of context or anything like that.
Literally, this lady sitting to my right, excuse me, left.
You're a creative person.
I'm a creative, person.
Camera right.
Oh
Camera
my God.
right. Yeah.
Literally the best networked person I've ever met in my life. So Grace, tell us how you do it.
You go first. Well, okay, I will. So I think the way you build a network, there's a couple things. There's a difference between a network and a support group. So if there's wine and crying, you're in a support group. And there is a difference. And particularly for women, I know there's men in the audience, you do not have to like the people in your network. A network is an exchange of information, power, and opportunity. Your IPO. Information, power, and opportunity. The way I built a network was to be of service to people. People would ask me to do something, and as often as I could, I'd say yes. Could you have a coffee with me and talk to me about my resume back in the day, right? Would you talk to my son or daughter about what college they should think about? So over the years, I was as helpful as often as possible to as many people as I could be. And I volunteered for an association, and I met literally thousands of women, Dawn being one of them. I facilitated as a volunteer the Betsy Magnus Leadership Program, which is it's the premier leadership program for women in the cable industry. And I did that for 13 years as a volunteer. So I got a lot out of it. When you give, when you are of service to people, it's not all about the money. Your career also hinges on relationships. People who will take your call, people who will make an introduction for you. And so when I launched my company, I had 7,000 people that I was connected to where I could raise my flag and say, I'm out here. And my first customers were people like Dawn, people who knew me, who I had a relationship with. So relationships matter, but you have to be of service. However, I've also reached out to people and said, is there something that I can do for you in exchange for this information? Barter. Right? So if you're in school right now, those of you who got on the bus and you're that creative person who can tell your right from your left, I do think that's important. We'll talk about that later. But if you're that creative person and you're saying, gee, I really am not that strong, in the numbers, and there's someone on that bus who's a finance major, partner with each other. Start to leverage each other's skill set. Because I will tell you, for me, I got offered an opportunity to work for an organization, and everything they were telling me was in acronyms, and I didn't know what they were talking about, and I was too embarrassed to say to somebody, I don't know what that means. So I called a woman who I met through this leadership program who was in that same space, and I said, can you do ad sales for dummies for me? She gave me a 45-minute download. I walked in and got the job because I was able to say I knew what a DMA was. Couldn't tell you now, but I knew then. So anything else on networking? How about how you've connected with people?
So I would say that there was a long time in my career that I thought, well, I don't know about networking. It felt a little false to me. But what I realized is I like people, and you're right. If you
should be in HR.
Yeah, I have a career for you.
But if you're of service to somebody, that comes back to you. And then that just begins to grow exponentially. And so my aha was, oh, I guess I do network. I didn't realize that's what it was. I was just engaging in a way that felt comfortable to me.
Well, sometimes you go to an event and you don't know anybody else in the room. And so what I did for a while when I used to be a runner, not really a runner anymore, but I would look for people in the room who looked like runners, and I'd go up to them and say, hey, you look like a runner, and then at least you have something to talk about with somebody, an icebreaker.
You never said a word to me. I'm so sad. Not once. Should I be bitter about this?
You look like a surfer.
Thank you.
Why.
I'm a surfer. Thank you.
I would say that, I think it's, like everyone's saying, I think human psychology, if you give, you will get. That definitely happens. But also, there's a book called, Don't Eat Alone. And I really believe in that. I think oftentimes we end up, if we're not in meetings, eating our lunch or grabbing it in quickly. But try to see if you can eat with someone, especially if you're uncomfortable with that either position or role. You can reach out. And it's incredible how people will respond to what you said. People are always willing to help if you ask. And if you go into a networking event and you don't feel comfortable or you don't know anyone, just ask them a question.
Well, and the greatest question to ask is, what are you working on right now?
Yes.
Everybody's always, no matter what you are in life, you are working on something right now.
And I think the other thing is just going to an event is not networking, right? It's really connecting with people. And if you think of yourself as an introvert or someone who's shy, there's a great website. It's quietrev.com, and it's really about the power of introversion. So if that's the thing that keeps you, right? And particularly what we see with younger women is that sometimes they're very apologetic for coming up and saying hello, like, hi, could I have a minute of your time? And, walking up to someone and saying, I'm from such and such a school, I'm happy to be here today, and here's what I'm working on, and giving somebody something to have a conversation about. Let me ask you, because at this time in many people's academic careers, going into their first roles, they're told, find a mentor, find a sponsor. And I don't think that's as easy as we make people think it is. So any thoughts on how you get a mentor or a sponsor? And if someone just comes up and asks you, right, you're at Boingo, I want you to be my sponsor, what happens?
Well, I've been lucky enough to have formal and informal mentoring relationships. This is a true story. My first mentor is in this room today. She's sitting right over there. Jana Henthorn from the Cable Center was my first mentor when I was at Jones Intercable. The fact that I don't know my right from my left is not her fault in no way, shape, or form. So Jana was a sort of more formalized mentor and she was great in my early career. And over time, as I've grown, it's actually become more and more informal. What I find is you run into people who you realize, like, oh, this person could be great at such and such. Even in the green room, as we were talking today, sitting and talking to all three of these ladies, I was like, literally my mind's going off about, I've got a question for them about this. I'm going to follow up with them about that, because they've got a wealth of knowledge that I don't have, and so they could become informal mentors for me in a particular area. So it's sort of almost becoming attuned and aware of those opportunities. And sometimes that mentorship might be very formal, and sometimes it might be very informal. That's what I'd say.
So I had one formal mentorship, and the others have all been informal. And it's you see a quality in someone that you admire, and so you pay a little bit more attention to that. And for me, there's a gentleman who has passed away at ABC, and one of the things I admired about him was that he took everyone's input. And I learned afterwards, he might have had an immediate point of view, but he would not reveal it at that point. And two things happen with that. One is you tell the other person that you're listening to them, that you don't have a preconceived idea. And the second is you listen to them and you change what your immediate response would be. And so for me, mentorship has been kind of seeing those qualities in different people, observing, and then trying to integrate that into my style.
I think that's so helpful. Leslie, do you want to add something?
I've never had a formal mentor, but I've had informal mentors, and I've been a formal mentor. And I can say that the mentoring experience, every single time, you get back from it more than you put in.
And just very quickly, because we're going to move to Q&A, there's something about just being willing to hear feedback. So if you are coming into the work world, if you're looking ahead, one of the things that people will want you to be is coachable, right? If you need to course correct and someone shares information with you and you said, that's not true, drop the mic and walk away, then that person is going to be less willing to help you course correct in the future. So being able to own it and go, okay, maybe this particular thing doesn't serve me, let me fix this along the way. All of us have had to change something, sometimes 20 times a day. I had a boss one time tell me, don't be funny in a meeting. And it was great, great. It was hard, but I needed to hear it. So we're gonna open this up to Q&A, because we know a lot of you have traveled a long way, and you might have some questions for our panelists. I'm assuming there's some mics out there, but you'll yell loudly. So, and I see a hand in the back. There's a gentleman, I think, in a blue shirt, and the lighting's a little tough, and if you just sort of yell your name and your question and who it's directed to. Thank you.
Toby Wall, Syracuse University. Ladies, just out of curiosity, I just got back into school myself after a 7-year hiatus, but in my master's program, it's 75% women. And I look around the crowd, there seem to be so many women out there. What can, and you talk about all the problems that women had entering the workplace and being taken a certain way, what can men of our generation do to help out our fellow, workers? I try to write on LinkedIn recommendations and things like that, but what else can we do to help out to change this culture?
I'll start, and you didn't direct it to anyone, so I'll just very quickly say 87% of women in the workforce today report to men. More women are graduating from colleges and universities today in the United States than men. So you are going to see more women. And I don't think that women have problems in the workforce. I think we just have opportunities to have our voice heard. I think as a male leader, it's a great question. I now run a co-ed program. It is about recognizing that the diversity of voice, whether it's gender, race, socioeconomic background, sexual orientation, whatever it is, being open to other styles of thinking. And the other thing is encouraging women to literally speak up. So if you have a woman who's not speaking in a meeting, Vibha, what do you think? And really start asking those questions. The fact that you're asking that tells me you're going to go a long way, because the truth is organizations with women in leadership and on their boards are more financially successful. You want us at the table. Ladies, any other advice?
So I have one guiding principle for me. People say they're open to new ideas, but they're typically open to a version of their idea. So you truly have to be open to an idea that makes you feel uncomfortable, because sometimes that's where the greatness comes from.
I see a hand. Yes, please.
My name is Shu. I'm also from Syracuse University. I have a question for Don. It's like you said before, you left Time Warner, right? My question is, what made you make the decision to leave Time Warner and work for a small corporation?
That's a great question. So I had worked for Time Warner for 10 years. I was sort of topped out at what I could do in my level. The only role that was above me at that point was a CMO. And I'm going to say something that is going to get me in such trouble. But I was unwilling to move to Stamford, Connecticut, and I'm not a white male. So I knew I was not going to get that job.
She's a California girl. She wasn't going to Connecticut.
Yeah. So I thought that probably my next move was going to be to go work for one of the networks. I thought I'd probably go run marketing for ABC or Disney or someplace that was there. I thought that would be the next move for me. And so I decided that what I really needed was some interview practice, because I hadn't interviewed in 10 years, and I thought, well, I need to start, I'm going to have some of these conversations, and I need to start practicing my right from my left, for example. And so I was recruited to talk to this startup that was interesting because it was started by Sky Dayton, who founded Earthlink. I knew a lot about Earthlink because we worked with them at Time Warner. Because my role at Time Warner, I sat on the product council, so I knew what our long-term product roadmap was, and I knew that Wi-Fi was going to figure prominently in that down the road. So I went to go talk to this company. I'd never heard of them before, and I came home from interviewing that night, and my partner said, "How'd it go?" And I was like, "Not good." And she's like, "Why?" And I said, "Because I loved it." And I was totally entranced by their story, what they were doing, and I decided to make the leap. And they were not profitable. They had just received a seed round of funding. But I decided that if there was ever going to be a time to do it, now was the time. Because, as the older you get, the harder it becomes to sort of make that leap. So I thought, if I'm ever going to go try to do this, now is the time. And it was a lucky bet. 2% of venture-backed companies ever go public. And so we were very, very lucky. And I got to ring the bell on NASDAQ on opening day, the day we went public, which was very fun.
But I would say this, sometimes when you leave a company, it's not because for reasons of upward mobility, it's because you hate your job, right? So that first job I had out of college where I was writing hardware and software manuals, I also got involved in customer care. And this was, these were companies that were calling in because their ads weren't running. And that's talk about follow the money. It was this one man from Fort Wayne, Indiana, screamed in my ear so many mornings that I ended up on Sunday nights having a seriously upset stomach because I was like, I didn't want to go to work the next day. I could read, I had a 1200 baud modem. I could look into their equipment and see that the ads weren't running, and I would just have like this whole stress thing the whole night. So if you feel sick to your stomach about going to work, it's time to change your job, because that's the stuff that causes cancer.
No, I agree with Leslie. And you know, when you talk about your career, one thing we don't talk about enough as leaders is happiness. And there is an element where you're going to have to choose your path and be true to who you are. Don't forget to put happy in the equation. And it doesn't have to look like anybody else's definition. It has to work for you. Is there a question on this side of the room? I've seen some. Yes, yeah, yes.
My question is, you were talking before about faking it to make it. And what are some tips for interns that really have no idea what they're doing and just learning everything and want to be able to learn more but don't really know where to start?
Any tips?
I think if I understood your question, you're saying what are the tips for learning
So
what
you walk
don't
in,
know?
you're the intern, and you're supposed to help, but you're not really sure what to help. You're not getting a lot of guidance, but you don't want to ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
How do you
I think
maneuver through
yes,
that?
yeah. I think it's important to ask the question. I think it's important to say, hey, where do you want me to start? Or if you want to learn it yourself, I think it's. There was a saying that I always remind myself and others is, are you running towards or running from, right? So if you're running towards something and there's something that you want to learn, then you can go ask your manager or whoever it is and say, look, I like to be, I want to learn more about finance. So what are the things that you can give me in this job while I'm here for the next 3 months as an intern that I can do in finance? And they may say, well, here's something that you could do, or here's such and such you could talk to. So I think you have to speak up and at least give some focus around what is it that you want to learn first. So that's really important.
Sorry. I was going to add, if you observe something in the space that you're in, whether it's an office, I don't know what workplace, but if you observe something that seems to be a problem or friction, and you think you can help in some way, I think if you observe that, you ask the question first, and the fact that you've jumped into something that is causing a problem or is perhaps not working as effectively as it can is your opening, and then people see that you're someone who is paying attention to what's going on.
So my favorite question an intern ever asked me is, what's something you don't really want to do that you can just give me right now and I can go take care of? And I had all these files that needed to be done, and it wasn't pretty, and it was kind of a grunge job, but it needed to get done, and she took care of it, and then she came back and did something else, and then pay attention. Pay attention to what people like, oh, I know you need help with whatever, and offer. We have time for one more question. There was yes, right there. Thank you.
Hello, hi, my name is Kanaya. I'm from St. John's University. I work for a entertainment company. I'm the only woman. So my question is, I know we're talking about the power of yes, but what about the power of no? You feel like you're kind of selling yourself short because you are a woman and you feel like you need to do it, and feel like you're the more reliable one out of the sea of men that you're working with. So
I didn't hear it.
Can you give us some context?
Yeah.
Can you give us some context?
So basically my question is, have you ever felt like you're selling yourself short by saying yes because you wanted to do the job, because you saw yourself, being like the only woman in, a tech industry?
Like you don't want to feel like the yes man woman.
You don't feel like the yes man. Yeah. So that's really kind of my question. Like, how did you persevere from, doing certain things that you knew that you were better doing? If that makes any sense.
I think saying yes to what you want to do is important, not saying yes to everything. I think that's just the differentiator. I know we've been in circumstances where we're the only women in the room, but it's important to know what you want to do. So what's your focus? And say yes to opportunities or possibilities in that area. And if it's something beyond that, which you don't feel comfortable with, or that's not what you want to pursue, then you just have to say no in that case and say, no, this is not what I'm not interested in this. This is what I can do.
Or you could use the yes, comma, and. Yes, and another thing I was thinking about is, or the yes, but. Yes, but another way of looking at it is.
And I would just give you a real practical tip. At my leadership program last week, we 31 participants that were men and 4 participants that were women, co-ed. And there was an exercise that we were doing. There was one woman at the table. We asked them to scribe and take notes, and the woman stood up to do this. Do not become binder girl. Do not become the note taker because you happen to be a woman. So those are the ways you can begin to say, hey, Mike, you can take the notes. There are some ways we can gain power. I heard a little bit of your question is because I'm the person that's doing it. But do not put yourself in a place where you're always the administrative backup, unless that's your job. But don't make that be your job. Don't let the default position, because you're a woman, be note taker, coffee getter, cleaning the table after the meeting. That's a collective energy. And particularly for young women starting out, that's something that we see. And you know, if you are the people that jump up, then people are going to let you. And I know we need to start to close.
So the 5 most important words. Like I'm hearing you say that maybe there's times when you want to say no. So 5 words. That doesn't work for me. Yeah. And that's especially good for when people ask you for your time and you don't want to have a meeting with that person, or you can't, or someone asks you to do something and you can't do it. Then you can say that doesn't work for me, but this does. So you can make things work for you rather than you always kind of, you know, we tend to apologize too much for what we can't do. Yeah. So if you say, no, that doesn't work for me, here's what does, that gives you a workaround as well.
I'd also say no is a complete sentence.
And don't apologize for saying no. Sometimes I say no, thanks for asking. So we are out of time for our panel today, but I hope you'll help me thank our panelists, Diane, Leslie, Vibha, and Dawn. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and I'm sure we'll be up for the next segment. Thank you.